Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, here to help you fall asleep with these chilling horror stories. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is, so feel free to leave a comment. When you're ready, get comfortable and relax. It all started. After 20 years on the force, there's one call I'll never forget. My shift started like any other, 9 p.m. sharp, and I was geared up for what I assumed would be another long night. It was an unusually chilly Monday in San Antonio, and I expected a quiet patrol. After a brief roll call at the station, I grabbed the keys to my cruiser, loaded up my standard issue gear, including my sidearm and baton, and headed out. That night, we were short-staffed, so I found myself patrolling solo. Strangely enough, being alone allowed me a sense of freedom, a chance to be just myself. In those moments, my heart felt detached, no longer fully in sync with the duty I had pledged to serve. At first, I felt like a hero, someone who could make a difference. Now, after years of routine calls and endless miles, I felt like just another statistic. Another weary soul counting down the hours until I could finally go home. Time dragged on as I cruised aimlessly through the quiet, shadowed streets of downtown San Antonio. My eyelids grew heavy, and by 3 a.m. I was fighting off sleep with every fiber of my being. I was so exhausted that I almost considered pulling over for a brief nap, when suddenly, a crackling voice over the radio snapped me back to attention. "Dispatch, please respond. We have a call at location Echo 26. The alert jolted me. I hadn't even noticed my radio's volume had been turned up. I grabbed it and replied, "This is Officer Daniels at Echo 26. Go ahead, dispatch." Dispatch reported that a silent 911 call had come in from the given address, along with all the coordinates needed to reach the scene. Usually, these calls turned out to be false alarms. A misdial, maybe, but duty called. I headed straight for the address. When I arrived, disappointment washed over me. It was an old apartment complex in a nondescript neighborhood. I called back to dispatch, but they confirmed without a doubt that the call had originated from that very location. Stepping out of the cruiser, I surveyed the building. It was an imposing structure, likely housing no fewer than 50 residents. From the exterior, no lights glowed, and I knew what had to be done. I would have to check every door to locate whoever had made the call. With a heavy sigh, I made my way to the front door. To my surprise, the door wasn't locked. As soon as I placed my hand on it, the door creaked open with an eerie groan. I stepped into a long, dim hallway, letting the door slam shut behind me so that its echo would fade into silence. Suddenly, everything went pitch black. I flipped on my flashlight, its flickering beam barely lighting up the corridor. I could just make out a staircase at the end of the hall. Relieved, I searched for a light switch. "Thank God," I muttered under my breath. But as soon as I flipped the switch, a sharp crack sounded. The bulb exploded in a tiny burst of sparks. Now, I was left with nothing but my flashlight to guide me. Slowly, I made my way up the stairs. At the top, another corridor awaited me, as dark as the bottom, lined with old, worn doors. The weak beam revealed peeling paint and decrepit frames. Glancing down, I noticed how filthy the carpet was, exuding a nauseating, rotten odor reminiscent of decaying meat or spoiled food. In many of our calls, we'd end up scrubbing our boots on the spot. This was clearly one of those cases. Dark, deep red stains marred the carpet in chaotic patterns. Despite the oppressive atmosphere, I reminded myself that this was likely just another accidental call, a check to see if the residents were okay. I began knocking on door after door. The first few doors offered no response. I had no intention of forcing my way into any apartment. Paperwork and legal red tape were best avoided. As I continued knocking, a soft noise from upstairs caught my attention, like furniture being dragged across a floor. Now, I was certain someone was home. I climbed another flight of stairs and followed the sound to the apartment it seemed to be coming from. On that floor, a narrow strip of light peeked from beneath a door. With a steady hand, I knocked loudly. "Hello? Police? Please open up." A rustling sound came from inside before the door creaked open just a crack. I saw an elderly, gaunt man whose pale, wary eyes scanned the dark hall. His unkempt gray beard and hollow features gave him an almost ghostly appearance. "We received a 911 call from this address. Just checking that everything's all right, sir," I said. For a long moment, the old man said nothing. Instead, his wide eyes stared into the hallway as if searching for something unseen. Then, in a raspy whisper, he said, "Everything's fine. You better leave." Bewildered, I asked, "Why?" Without another word, he slid the door further shut, and the narrow beam of light vanished. A sense of dread settled over me. Was there more going on here than met the eye? Yet, I forced myself to continue knocking on the other apartments. The silence was haunting, and as I walked through the building, the cloying stench grew stronger, the unmistakable smell of death. Every veteran officer knows that stench all too well. It immediately fills your nostrils. An uneasy feeling churned in my stomach. I'd seen death before, but nothing like this. I reached for my radio to call for backup, but it was dead. My colleagues were all tied up with other emergencies. Frustration mounting, I followed the nauseating odor, determined to locate its source. On the final flight of stairs, the stench nearly overwhelmed me. Suddenly, I heard a faint, muffled sobbing, as if someone were desperately trying to stifle their cries. Fear crept over me. My heart hammered in my chest, and sweat beaded on my forehead. The soft weeping abruptly stopped, replaced by a deep silence. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. I shone my flashlight into the darkness, revealing horrifying dark smudges. Stains splattered across the walls and floor. Blood had been splattered in irregular patterns. In that instant, panic surged through me as I reached once more for my radio, only to find it dead. I cursed softly under my breath. My fatigue had made me careless. I turned to head back down the stairs when a heavy, ominous breathing echoed behind me. Spinning around, I shone my light down the hall. The breathing ceased, and I noticed one of the doors stood ajar, as if someone had pushed it open while I wasn't looking. Every instinct screamed at me to run, yet a morbid curiosity forced me forward. I gripped my sidearm a bit tighter, though I was fully armed in Texas. Nothing in my training had prepared me for what I was about to face. Cautiously, I approached the open door. The repulsive odor hit me like a wall. I knew the source was inside. As soon as I stepped into the apartment, I flipped on the light switch near the wall, and what I saw would haunt me forever. Blood was everywhere. It smeared the walls, pooled on the floor, and even dripped from the ceiling. Numerous bodies hung lifelessly, as if in a butcher's display. Their forms were emaciated and ashen. Some appeared to have been there for months, others only recently. My breath caught in my throat, and I slowly retreated back into the hall. Suddenly, a deep, distorted laugh resonated in the darkness, a laugh so twisted it sent a chill down my spine. It grew louder and louder until the blood in my veins seemed to freeze. Without thinking, I bolted down the stairs, feeling a presence close on my heels. That eerie laughter nearly shattered my sanity. In a desperate moment, I collided with someone in the hallway. It was the same old man from before. He grabbed my arm and yanked me aside. "Follow me," he whispered urgently. In my panic, I obeyed without question. He led me hastily into his own apartment and shut the door behind us. "What the hell was that?" I demanded, panting. "Shh." The old man hushed, pressing his ear against the door. "Sit down," he urged. Trembling, I sank onto his worn sofa. Every ounce of my training, every year on the force, seemed to vanish in that moment. I was lost, unsure of what to do next. "I'm sorry," the old man began, turning to face me. "It's my fault you came here." "Excuse me?" I whispered. I was the one who made that 911 call. I was speechless. Everything felt like a nightmarish descent into madness. The old man settled into a dusty recliner and continued in a strained voice. "Believe it or not, I had to warn you. What roams these halls isn't human. Every few months it comes out, and it devours. I sent that call tonight when it started again, but I couldn't even speak properly. Whatever it is, it can sense your thoughts, almost read you. Try to leave and it will know." Fear and confusion seized me. I thought he was mad, yet there was an undeniable truth in his eyes. I listened silently as he went on. "It's always the same. Every so often, it abducts some of us from these apartments and they never return. Come morning, cleaning crews arrive and like magic, the apartments are ready to rent again. I moved in here only because the rents were low." He let out a brief laugh before sighing heavily. "Now I understand why. It picks those who no one would miss. It's as if it can peer into your soul. I don't know why it's never taken me, but anyone who tries to run or call for help ends up in that room." "And what are we supposed to do?" I asked, still trembling. Before he could answer, 3 loud knocks thundered at the door. We both froze, staring at the shuddering doorknob that trembled violently. "Don't move," the old man whispered. I couldn't tear my eyes away as something desperate stirred on the other side of the door, the knocking growing frantic before suddenly ceasing. "Honey, please let me in," a familiar voice called through the door, clear and pleading. "That's my wife," I shouted, springing to my feet. "No, it isn't. Don't let her in," the old man hissed. Curious and desperate, I leaned toward the peephole. There she was, my wife, looking frightened and tearful, sorrow etched deep in her eyes. She had been missing for 2 years, a hope I had long since abandoned. And now she was pleading to be let in. In a surge of panic, the old man lunged to block me from opening the door, but I managed to shove him aside with my elbow. I unlocked the door and cried, "Honey, come in," as I pulled it open. But the old man had been right. Standing before me was not my wife. Instead, a creature revealed itself. A gaunt, towering figure with impossibly long arms nearly brushing the floor. Its skin was a sickly, pale blue, crisscrossed with red veins, and its face bore a small, unassuming mouth with no eyes to be seen. Slowly, it tilted its head from side to side, as if weighing me against the old man, each movement accompanied by a disturbing crack in its neck. "You damn fool," the old man growled. "You let it in." Before I could react, the creature lunged with inhuman speed. It shoved me aside and clutched the old man by the leg, dragging him violently into the hallway. His agonized screams echoed ominously through the building as he and the creature vanished into the darkness. I stood frozen, the sound of his pain reverberating down the halls. Clutching my ears, I tried to block out the piercing echoes. I had to get out. The old man's screams haunted me even as I struggled to remember my duty, the very reason I had spent years on the force, to protect. Mustering every ounce of courage, I forced myself forward through the oppressive gloom. following the putrid odor that seemed to lead me toward the heart of the horror. Finally, I reached the corridor outside what I presumed was the source of the nightmare. With shaking hands, I directed my flashlight at the doorframe. From behind it came a faint cracking sound, as if something was moving. I inched closer, listening intently until I heard the steady, ominous tap of long, claw-like fingers scraping against the wood. At that moment, the macabre laughter resumed, louder and more insistent, as if it were speaking directly into my mind. "I'm afraid he's dead," a voice suddenly whispered so close, it felt as though it were right in my ear. I froze, unable to move as the voice continued, its tone almost controlling my limbs. "We can help each other. We could even be friends," it urged, insidiously echoing in my thoughts. Slowly, the creature turned its grotesque body toward me, its twisted form illuminated by the dim light. "You know, it's your fault he's dead," the voice sneered, its words stinging like needles. "Just like your wife. Maybe if you hadn't been so obsessed with work, always putting in overtime, always thinking only of yourself, you could have stopped her from disappearing." The searing pain in my head was almost unbearable. Yet, amid the torment, I recalled the old man's words. "It chooses those whom no one would miss." Perhaps, just maybe, I could resist this creature's temptations and simply walk away. Could it really be that simple? I wondered. With a determined step, I turned away, even as I heard the creature's footsteps scuffling closely behind me, its eerie, warm presence nearly tangible on my skin. Over and over, its insidious promises echoed, but I steeled myself against them. One thing was certain: the creature wasn't physically stopping me. As I neared the exit door, desperation mounted in the creature's voice. "I can help you," it pleaded, almost desperately. "You could live forever. I did it for the bastard who controls this place, and I could do it for you. Fame, money, anything you want could be yours." Strangely, its voice, tinged with desperation, was almost soothing, as if I had already conquered it. Suddenly, I stood before the exit. As I unlocked the door, I heard the creature rush up the stairs, but before it vanished completely, a final message invaded my mind. "I know you now. I'll find you, no matter where you go." My hands trembling, I closed the door behind me and slumped into my cruiser. I sat there for a long moment, trying to grasp whether what I had experienced was truly real. I knew no one on the San Antonio PD would believe my story. Slowly, I retrieved a spare battery from the back of my cruiser and installed it in the radio. No sooner had it been connected than a loud dispatch call boomed through the speaker once again. "Officer Daniels at Echo 26. Provide your status." I sat there, unmoving, as the same message repeated over and over until I finally picked up the handset and resignedly replied, "Accidental radio contact." The same stately brick buildings that graced the daytime skyline of Cedar Creek, Texas, retained their luster under the starry night. Even without the usual crowds and the clamor of everyday worries, these structures stood proud, bathed in moonlight along quiet streets that held a secret charm unique to the Lone Star State. I had long nurtured an odd, nearly obsessive affection for the darkness, a passion that blossomed on weekends when no early appointments forced me from sleep. When summer break arrived, I willingly surrendered to a nocturnal schedule, one that set me apart from the rigid rhythms of conventional life. I'd awaken around 9 p.m. after approximately 10 hours of sleep. My evenings began with the soft glow of a vintage television and the hypnotic scrolling on my smartphone, replying to messages sent hours earlier as I prepared for my solitary drive. Climbing into my father's battered pickup truck, I would set off along the long, isolated highways of West Texas, the vast stretches of Interstate 10 and Route 90 whispering promises of escape. Cedar Creek, a sleepy town with a history as old as the dusty cattle trails, had always been a place where nothing extraordinary ever happened, until that fateful night. My delight was not found in the familiar corners of Cedar Creek, but rather in the quiet solitude that only the dead of night could offer. It was then that the stifling inertia of small-town life would temporarily lift, replaced by a sense of forbidden freedom. In a town where no one ever seemed destined for greatness, where even the local diner and gas station bore names as unremarkable as Miller's, my own existence felt as mundane as the weathered wooden facades lining Main Street. That stifling banality cut deeper when nothing or no one intervened to distract from its relentless grasp. Cruising the empty roads at the break of dawn became my unspoken act of rebellion, an attempt to feel like the hero of my own Western film. I exchanged friendly, if reserved, waves with a few other vehicles lingering at red lights, each intersection a reminder of how deserted the night could be. There was an inexplicable thrill when a patrol car from the Texas Rangers or the local sheriff's office rolled by, its red and blue lights slicing through the darkness as officers with stoic expressions and southern drawls offered me cautious nods. Several times I was pulled over on these lonely highways, each encounter punctuated by stern advice to return home. I would feign attentiveness before easing back onto the road, my heart pounding as if I were a wanted outlaw on the run. In retrospect, I wish I had heeded their warnings more seriously. After several weeks, the crushing boredom of Cedar Creek, an echo of its unchanging past, began to resurface. Deep down, I secretly longed to experience the electrifying opening scene of a real-life horror film. The thought of larger-than-life shadows cast by towering mesquite trees, of ghostly figures lurking beneath the flickering neon of a rundown roadhouse, grew irresistible. I craved the kind of excitement that the monotonous reality of Texas could no longer provide. I filled my head with morbid fantasies and spectral visions as I merged onto the long, dusty road, hoping that the desert night might conjure something extraordinary. And then, as if summoned by my darkest imaginings, my evil, humanoid monster appeared. A tearful little boy standing in the middle of a lonely pedestrian crossing on a deserted stretch of road. Blinded by the glare of my truck's headlights, he froze my heart with a look that mingled confusion with sorrow. I remember the deep hum of the engine as I watched him stand there. With one hand pressed against his face and the other clinging desperately to a threadbare blanket, he seemed to embody the vulnerability of this forgotten town. I silently prayed that a caring parent would soon appear, whisking him away to safety. Yet, in the solitude of that Texan night, I knew the responsibility was mine. Opening the truck door, his muffled cries grew louder in the still air. "Are you all right, little fella?" "Did you lose your way?" I asked softly, using the open door as a shield against my own rising anxiety. "Daddy's gone. I can't find him," he whimpered, his voice echoing against the backdrop of distant coyotes. My eyes darted around, uncertain if this was a cruel trick or some bizarre twist of fate. "Come with me. I'll take you to the nearest sheriff's station. You'll be safe," I assured him, trying to steady my own trembling voice as well as his. Slowly, the boy extended his small arm, reaching for my hand as if drawn by an invisible tether. Just as I was about to reciprocate, the scene shifted dramatically. Flashing blue and red lights erupted behind me along the desolate stretch of highway. The roar of a speeding vehicle cut through the silence, and I spun around to see two officers, one from the Texas Rangers and one from the local sheriff's office, leaping from their cruiser. Their weapons were trained on me, and in that split second my mind reeled. "Keep away from the kid, And don't you even think of touching him, I shouted, instinctively raising my hands in a gesture of surrender. I haven't done anything wrong. I just found him here, I protested, my voice cracking under the strain of disbelief. One officer circled around to the front of my truck, allowing me to see his weathered face beneath a brimmed hat, his eyes burning with a mix of duty and regret. He took a deep, measured breath, and as his stern expression softened into one of pained understanding, his partner spoke up. "We know you mean no harm, son. We're not here to punish you. Just get back into your truck and drive home. It isn't safe out here tonight." I stood frozen, watching as the other officer's eyes glistened with unshed tears, a sight so unusual in our rough-and-ready Texas law enforcement that it shook me to my core. My gaze returned to the boy, whose frightened face had now morphed into an expression of inexplicable malice and revulsion. "Now!" the officer barked. Without a moment's hesitation, I scrambled back into the driver's seat and floored the accelerator. In the rearview mirror, I saw that the officers had shifted their focus from me to the little boy. The flashing lights faded into the endless dark, leaving me alone amid the whispering winds of the West Texas night. That once comforting feeling of isolation had evaporated, replaced by a dread I could scarcely comprehend. For the first time, I obeyed their command and headed home. I recalled merging onto that lonely highway, feeling both relief and sorrow at what I had left behind at the fateful intersection. The boy, the officers, and the unanswered questions of that surreal encounter. A hollow emptiness replaced my fear. I knew that the ensuing confusion would drive me to seek solace in the familiar, whether with family, old friends at the local diner, or even the endless chatter of online forums. But all I truly desired was to return to the comforting rhythm of my nocturnal escapades. I spent the remainder of the early morning hours scrolling on my phone and watching late-night TV shows, as I often did. Yet this time, the comforting banter of Texas comedians and the friendly messages from neighbors meant nothing. I already knew exactly where I'd be the next night, and nothing could pull me away from that routine. It was a pattern as unyielding as the long, straight roads of our vast desert. That brief span of time felt as though it stretched into years. I hadn't managed my usual 10 hours of sleep, but it was enough to prepare my mind for the haze I would soon need to dispel. As I waited, my thoughts vacillated wildly, at times clear as a young man's resolve in the deep darkness, at others pulsing with the thrill of chasing something forbidden under the starlit sky. I reflected on my reckless actions as I slid back into the driver's seat. All I could do was return to that notorious intersection and recast my plans, haunted by the angry, accusing stare of the boy as I drove in the same direction again. Countless scenarios played out in my mind on endless loops, like rehearsing a delicate confrontation before a Texan courtroom. They clogged every thought as I felt the vibration of the truck on the quiet highway, the hum of the engine mingling with the distant cry of a night bird, minutes away from the intersection, and as the fog of my confusion began to lift, a new encounter emerged unexpectedly. There, beneath the flickering neon of a defunct roadside bar, stood a little girl draped in a threadbare coat. My seatbelt tightened as I slammed on the brakes, coming to an abrupt halt on a gravelly stretch near an old cattle trail. She watched me intently as I opened the truck door. This time, with deliberate finality, I closed it behind me with a resounding slam, stepping out into the cool Texan air without the comfort of any barrier. I paused a few steps away, waiting in silence for her to speak. There was something uncannily strange about her presence. "Mommy's gone. I can't find her," she repeated in a flat, emotionless tone, the words echoing as though in a vast, empty canyon. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice a cautious murmur. "Mommy's gone. I can't find her, she intoned once more, her voice unnervingly identical to the little boy's earlier cry. I knelt down slowly, careful to maintain a respectful distance so our eyes could meet on the same level. Where did you last see her? Why are you out here at this hour? I pressed gently, but she remained silent, her tears flowing unceasingly like a broken spring. I stared, transfixed, as her sobs gradually gave way to a chilling change in expression. Just as I hesitated on my next words, she lifted her tiny arm and reached out, as though imploring me to take her hand. A desperate yearning surged within me to close the distance and help her, yet something in her vacant, almost inhuman gaze made me hesitate. The sorrow etched on her face was drowned out by an emerging, unsettling emptiness in her eyes. Please stay right here, okay? I'm going back to the truck to call someone who can help. I tried to reassure her in a calm, measured tone. I promise I'll be right back. In that moment, her expression shifted violently. The helpless fear melted into a fierce anger that turned to raw aggression. Her eyebrows knitted tightly, and the corners of her mouth contorted into a venomous snarl. Mommy's gone. I can't find her. Her voice, now warped and guttural, sounded less like a child's plea and more like the low, menacing growl of a beast. Her entire appearance transformed into something out of a Texas ghost story, a monstrous figure emerging from the desert shadows. I straightened up and began backing away toward my truck, but she followed every step, matching my pace with an unnerving precision. I nearly stumbled as I quickened my pace, desperately reaching for the truck door while keeping a wary eye on her relentless approach. Just as I reached the cold metal frame of my pickup, I managed to clamber inside and lock the doors, my heart pounding like a runaway stallion. Then, without warning, she appeared at the window. Her face distorted further with each passing second as she clawed at the glass, her voice rising in a frenzied, haunting refrain. Mommy's gone. I can't find her. By now, her tone had shifted from a child's cry to the unearthly roar of a creature born of nightmares. I watched in horror as her delicate features contorted. Her cheekbones seemed to crack under unseen pressure, revealing deeply scarred eyes, while her lips twisted into a ghastly grimace and her mouth opened into a yawning void reminiscent of a cursed carnival mask. I could even hear the unsettling crack of her joints, as though she were stretching unnaturally, all the while repeating the terrified refrain. Scratches began to mar the truck's window, each mark a reminder of my precarious situation. Just as the thought of heading home began to seem like a distant, fading dream, the dull glow of roadside lamps emerged, punctuated by the echo of gunshots reverberating through the Texas night. The creature's head jerked around, as if in search of the source of the shots. As the staccato reports of gunfire continued, the familiar blue glow of an emergency vehicle appeared, briefly illuminating one side of her grotesquely deformed face, before she bolted down the street, across manicured lawns and forgotten homesteads, and vanished into the consuming darkness. My breath caught in my throat, my heart pounding as fiercely as a rodeo bull. A desperate urge to cry overtook me, yet I could do nothing but sit frozen in the fragile safety of my truck. Suddenly, I heard the heavy, determined stomp of boots on gravel as a Texan officer sprinted past my vehicle. Not far ahead, he paused, peering into the shadows from which the creature had fled, ensuring it would not return. The officer turned and approached my battered window. Studying the scratch marks, his weathered face revealed a mixture of relief and sorrow. I recognized him immediately. It was the same officer from the previous night, the one whose eyes had silently conveyed the pain and regret of past encounters. He gestured for me to lower the window further, a silent assurance that he held no ill will. "It's safe now, son. She won't be coming back. You deserve to know what's going on. Please, roll down the window and I'll explain everything." "Sharp," he called through the glass, his voice rough with emotion. How did he know my name? Overwhelmed by confusion and an uncontrollable urge to weep, I complied, lowering the window completely. The officer fought to conceal the lingering pain from that night as he spoke. "I'm sorry this happened. Here, take this." He extended a worn manila folder filled with documents. "Drive straight home and read this. I wish I could have done more to help." With a trembling voice and tear-bright eyes, he pounded lightly on the roof of my truck before returning to his patrol car, its siren fading into the distance. For a long moment, I sat in the eerie quiet of the dark highway, staring at the folder. Its front bore a stark white sticker with bold letters reading, "Night Criers." My curiosity was abruptly mixed with dread as I realized I was still sitting on the roadside, with the window open. I waited tensely until the window finally closed, listening as my truck's tires squealed along the asphalt under the vast Texas sky. I must have broken every speed limit on my way home. The tears that threatened to spill remained locked away, a silent testament to the turmoil inside me. Clutching the folder tightly on my lap, I repeatedly checked to ensure it hadn't been lost. With a sudden jolt, I braked onto my driveway, stormed through the front door of my modest home, and collapsed onto my bed. Trembling, I opened the folder, only to find 2 sheets of paper within. Each page was stamped at the top with photocopy and detailed a chilling warning: "Night Criers. Extremely hostile and should not be approached without a firearm. Bullets appear ineffective, though loud noises trigger panic and prompt them to flee. Under no circumstances should they be touched." Appearing in the guise of desperate children, night criers manifest exclusively between midnight and 3 a.m. If a night crier is touched, the victim transforms into a night cry regressor. Tests reveal that aside from an overwhelming compulsion to return to the night criers, the victim loses memories of prior encounters and appears roughly 2 years younger, a vicious cycle of regression that goes unnoticed. When an adult regresses to the state of an infant, they transition from a regressor into a night crier. Only then does the full circle become painfully clear. The only recourse for a victim, once turned into a night crier, is to persuade another person to initiate physical contact, thus passing on the cycle to allow a return to adulthood, or to succumb to the final stage. Details about the final stage, including its vulnerabilities, destiny, and even the life expectancy of those afflicted, remain shrouded in mystery. On the next page was printed the name of my hometown, Cedar Creek, home to both night criers and regressors. Its 95,362 inhabitants are all regressors. Since 1995, a system has been in place here to control the cycle and shield the unaware public from night criers. Since 2005, only law enforcement officers who encountered night criers during their night shifts have been mutated into regressors, to contain the cycle as much as possible. Civilians and officers who have experienced the cycle 10 times are subsequently detained and reported as either killed in action or missing, in order to conceal the visible regression of their childlike traits from family and friends. Revealing one's regressive state to another regressor is known to cause severe psychological damage and often leads to madness. An attack by the final stage appears to mitigate the risk of such mental deterioration. I looked around my nearly empty room. Most family photos had vanished, and I could barely recall my parents' first names. I wasn't even certain if I had siblings anymore. On the following sheet of paper, my last name appeared alongside an unfamiliar title: Officer Sharp, current status, regressor. My head spun, and my mouth felt parched. Officer Sharp encountered a night crier during his night shift on February 4th, 2015. By the time he was transferred to the new regressor housing, his age had regressed from 45 to 25. He was subsequently reported missing by his wife and 2 children, and now lives in a facility with others caught in earlier stages of the cycle. His future remains uncertain. I had a wife and 2 children somewhere, a real family whose names and faces were slowly fading into the background, replaced by those of my new, involuntary community. I was overwhelmed with anger, confusion, devastation, and disbelief. Cedar Creek wasn't merely dull, it was fundamentally wrong. What I had witnessed, the guttural, animalistic growling outside my window, was my fate. My only choice was to continue living as if I were insane, forever dismissed by the outside world and unable to share my story without plunging others into madness. I spent the entire night and the following day on my bed, clutching that folder as I grappled with the weight of my destiny. I knew what had to be done, even if it meant sacrificing my old life as the price for forging a new path. That officer had known me too well. He couldn't meet my eyes without seeing the agony of my relentless regression. I refused to let myself become just another creature he could use as a cautionary tale. Now, as midnight neared once more, I sat there desperate to reclaim my life. I could not continue living with the memory of who I once was and the reality of what I had become. When the night deepened further, I would climb into the pickup of the man I had once mistaken for my father and drive back into the darkness, continuing the cycle until a chance to restore my true self emerged. I gripped the keys tightly in my hand. It was a pattern I had followed 1,000 times before, on those endless, lonely Texan highways. I am Detective Hank Lawson of the San Antonio Police Department, and for weeks I've been drawn into an investigation that blurs the line between grim reality and the surreal. We received a search warrant for a modest brick house in a rundown neighborhood of San Antonio's west side, a neighborhood known for its aging structures, stray mesquite trees, and the distant hum of oil rigs on the outskirts. This house belonged to John and Catherine Miller, a couple whose troubled lives mirrored the harsher edges of life in South Texas. While combing through their sparsely furnished home, I found little to suggest criminal activity, until I discovered, hidden in the small room of their 10-year-old daughter, Lisa Miller, a battered diary. Its pages chronicled a story that transcended mere childish scribbles, hinting at a life as neglected and painful as the harsh Texas sun. Almost entirely penned in the third person, the diary's account still echoes with a haunting clarity. On her 10th birthday, Lisa decides to take a walk. It was a cool autumn afternoon in the early 1990s, around 4 p.m., when Lisa Miller, who to everyone around her seemed nearly invisible, decided to set off alone. On that day, no one remembered it was her birthday. Neither her father John, whose shifting jobs in the local oil fields left him adrift, nor her mother Catherine, whose struggle with prescription pills had rendered her a ghost in their troubled home, nor her classmates or even her elementary school teacher Mrs. Johnson, who attempted each day to spark joy with birthday greetings scrawled on chalkboards. Lisa felt unseen by the world, as though she existed only in the periphery. Despite a deep-seated loneliness and inner anguish, she carried herself with a quiet defiance. That same day, upon returning from school, Lisa was once again greeted by the thunder of her parents' bitter arguments, fights fueled by unpaid bills, dwindling wages, and the ceaseless battle for survival in a low-income Texas neighborhood. John, forever unable to hold down a steady job, and Catherine, mired in her self-destructive habits, never spared her a moment's care. Instead, Lisa became a silent witness to the chaos that reigned within those cracked walls. For as long as she could remember, neglect had defined Lisa's existence. Forced to attend school in faded, ill-fitting dresses, a threadbare coat that did little to protect her against the chill of a brisk San Antonio morning, and thin, worn sweaters that were more a symbol of her abandonment than a shield from the cold. She bore both the physical marks of the harsh Texas climate and the invisible bruises of familial indifference. There were days when violent storms knocked out power in their cramped home. Yet her parents were too absorbed in their own worries to provide even a warm blanket. Even local authorities and child services had taken note. Time and again, Lisa was sent to a community aid center where she received second-hand coats, socks, and other basic supplies. But these vital items often vanished as if never meant for her, leaving behind not only the scars of bitter cold, but also fresh bruises along her tender arms and legs, a silent testament to a system that failed to protect her. On that fateful day, as Lisa stealthily slipped out of the house, she carefully set her worn school bag, with its bottom marred by a large, ragged hole, on an old wooden kitchen chair. With trembling hands, she grasped a stale cracker that Catherine had prepared the day before and quietly stepped out the front door. Driven by a desperate need to escape a life of neglect, she made her way to the modest, tree-lined backyard that, with its stray yucca and scrub oak, resembled a little urban woodland more than a typical Texas garden. Her path led her to a nearby neglected park, where the rustle of dry leaves and a cool, whispering wind were her only companions. As she nibbled on the dry cracker, so parched that the first bite sent a burning sting through her tongue, a faint, almost imperceptible hissing caught her attention. From the underbrush slithered a small, dark brown snake, its scales glinting in the weak, late afternoon light. Lisa's heart pounded as she realized this was no ordinary creature. It was a venomous snake. She recalled vague warnings from old library books in the local community center about how such venom could impair blood clotting and even lead to death. Yet, instead of fleeing in terror, something stirred within her. A surge of defiant anger at a world that had always ignored her pain. Clutching the cracker she had stashed in her ragged pocket, she extended it toward the snake with trembling determination. The creature, either confused or driven by hunger, lunged with lightning speed, snatched the cracker, and sent it skittering across the cracked pavement. In that instant, a seething rage took hold of Lisa, a fierce, unyielding fury born of years of neglect. Without a moment's hesitation, she picked the cracker up again, stuffed it into her mouth despite knowing that remnants of snake venom might cling to it, and burst into tears as the cold, accusatory stare of the snake met her own. Clammy and heart-pounding, she fled into the nearby woods, an area bordered by spindly mesquite trees and rugged stony ground, seeking refuge among the shifting shadows of the towering oaks. Along her hurried path, she brushed aside low-hanging branches, stumbled over gnarled roots, and lost another piece of her fragile innocence. Her worn jeans, now splattered with mud and dust, as if marking the unyielding battle against her fate. Finally pausing beneath a flickering beam of the setting sun, she wondered if her parents were, at that very moment, once again embroiled in bitter conflict back at the dilapidated house. Then came another hissing sound, even closer this time. A small snake, whom, in a burst of innocent affection, she had named Albert, emerged from a clump of scrub brush and now stood before her, head cocked slightly as if to scrutinize her. With wide, glistening eyes, she observed the creature that seemed to savor her palpable fear and sorrow. Slowly, almost in a ritualistic manner, she reached for the stale cracker hidden in her pocket. Each second stretched out as Albert's gaze remained fixed on her. No sooner had she retrieved the cracker than Albert reacted with uncanny swiftness. With a sharp hiss, he lunged forward, grabbed the morsel, and swallowed it whole before Lisa could register the act. A numb shudder took hold of her, not only from fear, but from the crushing realization that even in this seemingly significant moment, her existence would forever go unnoticed. After that harrowing encounter, Lisa trudged back to the dismal house, burdened by an overwhelming emptiness. There, her father, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights and clad in torn work clothes stained by days in the unforgiving Texas heat, awaited her. "Where have you been, Lisa?" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the thin walls, while her mother, adrift in a fog of medication and despair, lingered silently in the background. Rather than explain herself, Lisa retreated into her small room and shut the door, a silent protest against a world that would never understand her. The following days crawled by in a nightmarish haze. Confined to her room by her increasingly harsh parents, and allowed only brief trips for the essentials, Lisa's sole comfort lay in memories of Albert, the one friend who had once offered her solace amidst the desolation. In the long, lonely hours she spent in that dim room, she meticulously planned to meet him again in the woods. She carefully packed a small meal: grapes, a slice of ham and cheese from the local deli, a piece of cheese, another stale cracker, and a few fragments of chocolate bar. And on a subdued Saturday afternoon, under the fading glow of a Texas sunset, she slipped quietly out of the house. Her path led her back to the derelict park she had claimed as her secret refuge. With trembling hands, she laid the carefully rationed food on a moss-clad rock, its surface softened by years of neglect, and softly called out, "Albert." It wasn't long before the little reptile emerged from the scrub, its tongue darting in and out as if tasting the humid air. In a silent, almost sacred ritual, they shared the meager meal. Lisa gently offered a slice of ham and cheese, which Albert accepted in his swift, instinctual way, and vice versa. Yet, when the last crumb lay forgotten on the rock, an oppressive silence fell. Lisa felt a deep, aching incompleteness welling up inside her. Reaching out to gently stroke Albert, she recoiled at the cold, slimy texture of his scales. With a soft, discontented hiss, her little friend retreated into the gathering darkness, and Lisa could do nothing but nod as tears streamed silently down her face. The next day, driven by a desperate hope to see him again, she returned to the woods with an even richer cache of provisions. But once more, Albert did not appear, leaving Lisa to confront the bitter truth that her only friend, her solitary beacon of hope, might never return. Growing increasingly suspicious of the missing food from their scant family pantry, her parents' distrust grew. One evening, as her father, his face contorted with rage and desperation, confronted her, he hissed in a trembling voice, "Lisa, you're eating all our food. Where do you get these things?" In a panic, Lisa mumbled an explanation about always being hungry after school, but her words fell on deaf ears. Her parents, hardened by years of struggle in a harsh world, were quick to punish any deviation from the norm. With a pained grimace, her father pointed to her chest and ordered her back to her room. In despair, Lisa withdrew into the bleak solitude of her own space, the heavy closing of the door severing her from the outside world. In the ensuing days, the oppressive confinement grew ever more severe. Lisa was monitored relentlessly, allowed only minimal movement, and served meager portions of food. In the long, torturous hours, she clung to the memory of Albert, the silent companion who had once infused a glimmer of hope into her shadowed existence. She began to record her thoughts in her diary, each entry written in the third person as if some unseen observer was chronicling her tragic fate. On one gloomy Saturday afternoon, as the dusky twilight deepened over the scrubland, Lisa summoned a final burst of courage to step into the backyard once more. With a carefully packed bundle, 2 slices of bread, a slice of ham and cheese, and a few grapes, she ventured toward the worn-out park. The familiar stillness of the rugged Texas landscape enveloped her, and soon she discovered Albert, motionless in a familiar hollow beneath a scraggly mesquite tree. "Albert, my friend," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mingling of fragile joy and sorrow. As if stirred by her call, the little snake slowly lifted his head, his dark eyes gleaming in the fading light. In a burst of childlike enthusiasm, she shared her food with him, a tender, bittersweet exchange that, in her lonely world, shone like a tiny beacon of light. But suddenly, this fragile harmony was violently shattered. From the dense thicket emerged John, her father, his face ashen and twisted in rage. In his calloused hand, an old rusted machete glinted in the dim, dying light of the Texas evening. "What do you think you're doing, Lisa?" he roared as he charged forward. In a moment of panic, she tried to break free, but his massive hand clamped around her delicate arm. In a desperate, instinctive bid to protect her, Albert lunged forward one final time, only to be struck by a savage swing of John's machete. With a single, brutal blow, Albert's small head was severed, and his tiny body convulsed for several agonizing seconds before collapsing lifelessly to the parched ground. Lisa stared in utter horror at the still form of her only friend. A crushing emptiness and a sense of betrayal overwhelmed her as her father roughly dragged her from the woods. "This ends now," he growled, hauling her back into the suffocating confines of the house. The harsh cold of loss melded with the icy grip of domestic violence, and Lisa sank into a deep, hopeless despair. The following days blurred into an endless nightmare. Locked away in her dim room, Lisa was treated like a prisoner. Her physical suffering, wrought by hunger and abuse, merged with the searing agony of losing her only friend. In the few moments when she attempted to write, it felt as if Albert's spirit seeped into every word, forging an eerie bond that threatened to engulf her entirely. With each passing day, as her condition deteriorated, she could feel the toxic residue from that stale cracker, possibly contaminated with traces of snake venom, slowly draining her life force. It was as though every bite plunged her deeper into a mystical connection with Albert. Her body, already scarred by neglect and maltreatment, began to literally fall apart. Her pallid face, sunken cheeks, and a form that seemed to dissolve with every labored breath. On one particularly dismal morning, barely capable of lifting her eyes, Lisa weakly knocked on her room's door and whispered, "Dad, I need a doctor." But her plea vanished into the cold, empty corridors of the house. Instead of offering help, her father dragged her down once more into the dark, damp basement, leaving her isolated for hours with nothing more than cold water and scant food. Finally, when her condition became unbearable, John decided, in one last cruel attempt to cover his own failures, to drag Lisa out to the abandoned park on the edge of town. With tired, lifeless arms, he hauled her limp body until they reached that desolate spot where Lisa and Albert had once shared their meager meals. There, methodically and without a trace of emotion, he began to dig a shallow grave with a battered shovel. Each strike into the sodden Texas earth resounded like a death knell for Lisa's fragile existence. As her father callously deposited her lifeless form into the shallow pit, in one surreal, final moment, Lisa felt as though she were intertwined with Albert's spirit. Her eyes slowly closed, a faint, bittersweet smile playing on her lips as she exhaled her final breath, her thoughts filled with memories of the small friend who had once brought her solace. The final entries in the diary end abruptly and enigmatically with the words, "Lisa Miller has been missing for weeks now. No one has seen or heard from her. A team of detectives and rescuers has excavated the suspected grave. We once believed this diary was written by her, so why is it in the third person? And how could she continue to write if she were already gone?